Whenever the vicious portion of population shall be permitted to gather in bands of hundreds and thousands, and burn churches, ravage and rob provision stores, throw printing presses into rivers, shoot editors, and hang and burn obnoxious persons at pleasure, and with impunity, depend on it, this government cannot last. Abraham Lincoln. Today, we are going to talk about Labor Day because today is Labor Day 2020 and the origins of what Labor Day is, where it comes from, and why it is the first American socialist holiday, the first American Commie Day. Before we get there, though, this is AllMinucOne. My name is Bill. If you like my content, please like, share, or subscribe. Do all three. Help me grow, people. Help me grow so I can spread the word against this terrible, terrible cancer that has been consuming our great nation for the last decade. Now, if you all would like to watch a live show, a loose show, have some chat with us, ask questions, that kind of stuff, I do one every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. called TheEnds Justify the Memes. You can find us over on DLive at ends_justify_memes. Or you can watch our replays over on YouTube, TheEnds Justify the Memes. If you would like to support me and my family, you can go over to Subscribestar to AllMinucOne, and if you all subscribe there, I will start making content for you very specifically for your patronage. Now, back to today's subject, Labor Day. What it is really about. Labor Day is observed on the first Monday in September to pay tribute to the contributions and achievements of everyday working families. This is from unionplus.org, by the way. The first Labor Day holiday was celebrated in New York City on Tuesday, September 5th, 1882, following the deaths of 13 workers during the Pullman strike in June of 1894. Now, this was a railroad strike. I'm going to cover more about this in depth. President Grover Cleveland made reconciliation with the labor movement a top political priority, and Labor Day became a federal holiday in 1894. During the major economic depression of the early 90s, the Pullman Place Car Company cut wages in its factories. Why did this happen? Well, this is business, people. That's what happens when you go through depression, recession. Economically, the business owners have to cut cost and places. So, discontented workers joined the American Railway Union, led by Eugene V. Debs, which supported their strike by launching a boycott of a Pullman car on all railroads. The ARU members across the nation refused to switch Pullman cars onto trains. I mean, they wouldn't use their cars. If there was a car there, they just wouldn't use it. So this held up the train lines, the shipping lines, because in the day that was much of how we ship things. When these switchmen were disciplined, the entire ARU struck and railroads on June 26, 1894. Within 4 days, 125,000 workers and 29 railroads had quit work rather than handle Pullman cars. The strike was broken by United States Marshals and some 2,000 United States Army troops. See, back then when they had insurrections, as we do now, they didn't play around. The Marshals and the military came in and they took care of it. They were sent in by President Grover Cleveland on the premise that the strike interfered with the delivery of the U.S. mail. During the strike, 13 workers were killed and 57 were wounded. Now, this Pullman railcar strike was not the first strike leading up to the indoctrination or inculcation of Labor Day. So let's read very quickly about Grover Cleveland. He was the first Democrat elected after the Civil War in 1885, our 22nd and 24th president. He was the only president to leave the White House and return for a second term 4 years later. Mark my words, if the great coup that the Democrats are looking at implementing right now, if this happens and somehow Biden actually gets put into office, he will be much like Jimmy Carter and kicked out. And I'm sure if Trump's still running strong, he'll come back and Americans will beg for him to be back because our economy and our responses to things like COVID will have absolutely crushed and destroyed us, as well as the Antifa and Black Lives Matter members out in the street, because the Democratic Party has no control over these people. They absolutely do not. And when they try to send the police in to do the appropriate actions, they will begin to assault members who are in government. I guarantee you, they've already been doing it. So this is from whitehouse.org. So let's read briefly. The first Democratic elected after the Civil War, Grover Cleveland, was the only president to leave the White House and return for a second term 4 years later. Let's see. At 44, he emerged into political prominence that carried him to the White House, and within 3 years, running as a reformer, he was elected mayor of Buffalo in 1881 and later governor of New York. Cleveland won the presidency with the combined support of Democrats and reform Republicans, or the mugwumps, who disliked the record of his opponent, James G. Blaine. So, I want to get into that because you need to understand that at the time, this is right after Reconstruction of the United States, after the Civil War, the Republicans ran and controlled everything. Now, there were third-party tickets, independents, if you would, that had been in the government. But at this point, this is when the parties began to become solidified. And the Republicans have rarely ever had complete unity. In fact, the only real unity they probably had was the abolition of slavery. And even on that front, it was not the abolition of slavery that carried them through as much as it was the holding together of the union of states. Now, I will freely say that slavery is an evil. I will also freely say that there is nothing within the Constitution that states that the individual states, the individual sovereign nations, cannot leave the compact of the greater union. In fact, I would say that power is reserved to them under the 10th Amendment. But that's that thing we don't talk about. We only talk about the first few. So, what are these mugwumps? They were Republican political activists in the United States who switched parties from the Republican Party by supporting Democratic candidates, Grover Cleveland, in the presidential election of 1884. They switched because they rejected the financial corruption and association with Republican candidate James G. Blaine. Now, what was going on, really, with Blaine, if I recall correctly, is he did not like he did not like reforms to civil service. So essentially, if people supported the party, they were guaranteed a spot, cronyism, if you would, within the government. So here is James G. Blaine. And Blaine twice served as Secretary of State, one of the only two persons to hold the position under three separate presidents, other than Daniel Webster. It successively sought the Republican nomination for president from in 1876 and 1880, before being nominated in 1884. And then he was narrowly defeated by Democrat Grover Cleveland. Blaine was of the late 19th century leading Republicans and champion of the moderate reformist faction known as the half-breeds. Now, they called them half-breeds because they weren't traditional Republicans. Mind you, the Republican Party was still in its infancy. It had only been about 30 or 40 years old at this point. President Lincoln was the first Republican president ever elected. So the opposing party came about from Rutherford B. Hayes. So after serving in the House of Representatives and as governor of Ohio, the lawyer and staunch abolitionist, he had defended refugee slaves and court proceedings during the antebellum years. The Republican Party nominated Hayes as its candidate for the presidency of 1876, where he won through the Compromise of 1877 that officially ended Reconstruction by leaving the South to govern itself. See, before that, the Republicans were essentially telling the South what to do, and many of the Democrats within the House of Representatives and within the Senate were not even allowed to vote for a long period of time. So Hayes put an end to that. Now, again, this is a little bit before Grover Cleveland, but I need you to understand the buildups to this period that Labor Day came, the volatility of the United States at the time. In any case, it says the office, he withdrew military troops from the South, ending Army's support for Republican state governments in the South and for the efforts of African American freedmen to establish their families as free citizens. Hayes promoted civil service reform and attempted to reconcile the divisions left over from the Civil War. So he was of a different class. He believed in a meritocracy government and the equal treatment without regard to wealth, status, standing, or race. This is important. You can see here the Great Railroad Strike of 1877. He vetoed the Bland-Allison Act, which put silver money into circulation to raise nominal prices, insisting that the maintenance of the gold standard was essential to economic recovery. What was happening was the United States was in its Gilded Era. It was becoming quite wealthy. And at this time, people started embracing the ideas of progressivism. So very briefly, we're going to talk about this Republican Party divide in the 1880s. It says the Republican Party was sharply divided by political factions in the 1880s, with New York Senator Roscoe Conkling's stalwarts on one side and Maine Senator James G. Blaine's half-breeds on the other. This is much like the neocons now versus the libertarians within the modern Republican Party. The difference is that the modern Republican Party is far more fractured than perhaps at this time. Now, the mugwumps, those were Republicans who basically voted Democrat and supported Democrats. There was much more fluidity at the time. Now, those people who are supporting the Democrats, those are all deep state spook personality types. Look at who they are. They're all big government people. They're not traditional conservatives. This is why identifying people by party alone is just silly. You need to look at their deeper ideology. So, President Rutherford B. Hayes' efforts to reform the spoils system, the tradition of awarding jobs to political supporters. The half-breeds, meanwhile, were composed of the moderate faction of the party. Ultimately, neither the stalwarts-backed candidate, formerly President Ulysses S. Grant, nor the half-breeds-backed Blaine were able to receive enough support to obtain the presidential nomination during the 1880 Republican National Convention. Instead, the 36 ballot and two fractions endorsed a compromise choice, Ohio Senator James Garfield. So briefly again, stalwart Republicans opposed the civil service reform measures advocated by Hayes' administration. Instead, the group favored a patronage system known as a spoil system that awarded political supporters with jobs in the federal government. At that time, the stalwarts had a base of conservative support in the South, an area where Republicans relied specifically on the patronage system to obtain posts in the heavily Democratic region. So essentially, they were bribing people to be Republicans within their party by giving them political positions. The half-breed Republicans represented the moderate wing of the Republican Party. In fact, the term half-breed was originally used to disparage as a disparaging term by the stalwarts to suggest their moderate rivals were only half Republican. The faction led by James Blaine supported Hayes' effort to institute civil service reforms. The half-breeds penned 1883 Pendleton Civil Reform Act, which put an end to the patronage system, instead specifying that federal government jobs should be awarded based on merit. Seems about right to me. So, it goes on to the convention and whatever else. You can read this if you want. This is a little website I found, classroom.synonym.com, and it's titled Divided Republican Party. So let's get back to this strike, though, that we were talking about. And I just wanted you to understand that there was a lot of political turmoil within the government itself, a lot of infighting, a lot of switching of factions. And because of that, the outer world, the economic world, was not quite stable either. This tends to be the case. Not because the government provides ultimate stability in the end, but when there is a lot of dissent and instability, it is often reflected within the government. Right now, we have very, very huge partisanship on the left and the right, two ideological spectrums, if you would. The left is a collective. They don't care how awful their people are. They remain together. The right, well, the right is all over the place, but essentially they believe in constitutionalism, except for the faction that is actually in power, those neocons. So here from Britannica, a Pullman strike, May 11th, 1894. In the U.S. history, widespread railroad strike and boycott that severely disrupted rail traffic in the Midwest and United States. The federal government's response to unrest marked the first time that an injunction was used to break a strike. Amid the crisis, on June 28th, President Grover Cleveland and Congress created a national holiday, Labor Day, as a conciliatory gesture towards the American labor movement. So they got a holiday for essentially rioting and striking and being crazy, because this is what communists do. They only work in by means of terror. They are political terrorists by the nature of being a mob. It is their way or no way. So a manufacturer of railroad cars, this is the Pullman Place Car Company, cut the already low wages of its workers by about 25%, but did not introduce corresponding reductions in rent and other charges at Pullman, its company town near Chicago, where most Pullman workers lived. As a result, many workers and their families faced starvation. When a delegation of workers tried to present their grievances about low wages, poor living conditions, and 16-hour workdays directly to the company's president, George M. Pullman, he refused to meet with them and ordered them fired. The delegation then voted to strike, and Pullman workers walked off the job on May 11, 1894. Now, here's the thing. They have every right to do that, and the owner of the company had every right to fire them. This is called being in a volunteer relationship. I cannot force you at the point of a gun to employ me or to pay me. Now, if enough people decided not to work for this company, the company would lose money, and eventually they would have to hire them back and negotiate their wages. Now, you may say, well, if there are other people willing to work, they needed to be stopped. No, they don't. And this is the problem with the mob union types. They will go after those people who are willing to work for the lower wages. As soon as the plant had emptied, company representatives posted signs in all gates. The works are closed until further notice. At the time of the strike, 35% of Pullman's workforce was represented by the American Railway Union, which had led a successful strike against the Great Northern Railway Company in 1894. Though they were not technically involved in the Pullman workers' decision to strike, Union officials had been in Pullman and at other meetings in which the strike vote was taken. It says a great deal of sympathy existed in Chicago and elsewhere for the Pullman workers who were seen as common men and women, tyrannized by an abusive employer and landlord. The question was how the ARU could support the workers, who, after all, did not exactly work on the railroads. One plan was to refuse to hitch Pullman cars to the trains and to unhitch those that were already attached. Another was to boycott. On June 22nd, the ARU delegates passed a motion to initiate a boycott unless the Pullman Company agreed to submit the dispute to arbitration on June 26. During the next 3 days, several committees were sent to the company in the hopes of winning concessions that that the boycott wouldn't be necessary, but they were turned away. So it says that the president predicted that once the switchmen refused to add or remove Pullman's cars from trains, the railroads would fire them and try to replace them with non-union workers. This is one of the reasons why, by the way, people that in certain areas there are laws against not being in the union, and you still have to pay union dues. It's ridiculous. Unions are not necessarily your friends. Now, that's not to say that collectivizing your work and going to your employer and asking for something is not unintelligent. In fact, a great example of this happened in Marvel and DC many years ago, back in the 1990s, under the leadership of Todd McFarlane of the Spawn comic book fame. He took with him many of the best artists, young, talented men who created Image Comics. And that created a big problem for Marvel and DC, to where they actually had to hire these artists back with big money. So the scenario played out as Debs had predicted. On June 27th, 5,000 workers left their jobs and 15 railroads were tied up. By the next day, 40,000 had walked off. On the third day, the number of strikes had climbed to 100,000, and at least 20 lines were either tied up or completely stopped. Well, if they just didn't work, they didn't need to do all this extra stuff. It says June 30th, 125,000 workers on 29 railroads had quit work rather than handle Pullman's car. So it says the effectiveness of the boycott. He was also alarmed at the anger expressed by the workers, which he feared could lead to violence during the first week of the boycotts. He sent some 400 telegrams, hundreds every day, to the ARU's locals to stay calm and not overreact. But see here, it says, after he left, however, groups within the crowd became enraged, set fire to nearby buildings, and derailed a locomotive. Unfortunately for the strikers, the locomotive was attached to a U.S. mail train, and this is why the president got involved. Just like now, they are assaulting and attacking federal buildings. So the injunction, given that most members of the ARU were either on strike or actively helping the strikers, that other unions had joined the cause, and that wildcat strikes were breaking out against individual lines. Violence may have been inevitable. So, when sheriffs in the Vermilion and Marion counties informed Illinois' Governor John Peter Altgeld that they feared that local labor actions would spiral out of control, he sent 6 companies of militia to Danville at the beginning of July and another 3 to Descartes with orders to quell any rioting and to clear the way for the trains. By early July, however, the federal government had already acted. In Washington, D.C., a major of the president's cabinet supported Attorney General Richard Olney's demand that federal troops be sent to Chicago to end the reign of terror. That reign of terror, of course, this choice of words, is a reflection upon the French Revolution. People, you do not have a right to destroy things because you think you're being treated unfairly. There's other people's property. Now, this seems to be only directed at the railroads. But this is how Labor Day came about. And it had to be quelled through violence. It says on July 2nd, AllMinucOne obtained an injunction from a circuit court judge, and two of them had strong intuition statements that prohibited the ARU leaders from compelling or inducing any employees of the affected railroads to refuse to fail to perform any of their duties. The injunction, which invoked both the Sherman Antitrust Act and the Interstate Commerce Act, also prevented the ARU leaders from communicating with their subordinates. It says those who have been trying to prevent the violence could no longer even send telegrams advising against it. The federal injunction having been issued, President Cleveland could now treat the strikes and boycotts as a federal issue, in which he did. In any case, it wasn't insurrection that was finally stopped. I need to remind all of you that the Articles of Confederation were scrapped because of a rebellion, Shays' Rebellion, ultimately. I do plan to go over the Second Amendment here at some time very, very soon, and the conversations that the founders had. I think the best way for me to do that is probably to take pictures of a book and put together a PowerPoint for you, which is why it's going to take a little bit of time. In any case, you need to understand that the federal government does have the right to quell these things. I think right now, politically, what we are seeing with President Trump is he's not trying to be heavy-handed. But today, most of you have forgotten what Labor Day is about or what it was or why it was instituted. It was kind of like saying, hey, we feel your pain even though you can't do this. This would be like us having a federal holiday, a Black Lives Matter Day or an Antifa Day, if you would. In fact, Labor Day is very much that. Because this is what just communists do throughout history. They act crazy and they do crazy things because they are not thinking about anything but, what they want, like they're little babies. They're not thinking of greater consequences. No, I get it. The Britannica article said people were getting hungry. Okay, I understand that. I'm sure that there were mutual aid societies, churches, there were philanthropists at the time that probably could have helped with that. I'm sure that there were better ways for them to strike and unionize. So it says why, this is from VOA, why American Labor Day is in September versus May Day. Why do we celebrate in September? Labor Day is a national holiday created to honor U.S. workers and their contribution to the economy. Many Americans use the day to celebrate the end of summer and would be surprised to know that the day has its roots in the labor movement of the 1880s. And it talks about the peak of the Industrial Revolutions and how they work 12-hour days, 7 days a week, blah, 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 blah. People still do this all over the world. We just got rich much faster, much sooner. We industrialized sooner. And all of this stuff, though, led to the bringing in of the progressive movement into the United States. It says the workers became more organized in the labor unions and begun to protest poor and unsafe working conditions and lobbying for more benefits from employees. This probably naturally would have happened over time without unions. Most places are not unionized now. Now, I know the government is highly involved with legislation, and I don't know if I agree with all that. Maybe state governments, but I don't know about the federal power to do such a thing. It says the U.S. Congress created the federal holiday on June 28th, 1894, designated the first Monday in September as Labor Day. What's the difference between Labor Day and May Day? Both Labor Day and the International Workers' Day, or May Day, honor the common worker. May Day, which is celebrated in most industrialized countries in the world, got its start because of events in the United States. May Day, by the way, is the communist holiday. So, on May 1886, a worker demonstration was held in Chicago's Haymaker Square to push for an 8-hour workday. A bomb went off at the protest, killing 7 police officers and 4 civilians. A bomb did not go off. Someone threw a bomb to the crowd. It was quite easy to get dynamite at the time. Because back then, they still respected the Second Amendment. In any case, I want you to understand this as this was in 1886 versus 1894 of the riots, the Pullman riots. So you're not taught these things in school because these poor workers, they're the good guys, no matter who they killed. Following the Haymarket Affair, a strong anti-union movement arose in the United States. Over the years, May Day became more associated with the political far left, while Labor Day, held in September, was recognized by a growing number of municipalities and states. When the United States began to seriously consider creating a national holiday for workers, President Grover Cleveland did not want to choose the May date because of its association with the Haymaker bombing. So, instead, pick the alternative day in September. Now, you probably think about Labor Day as sales and picnics and going back to school and don't wear white. I'm going to address that, by the way. Yeah. This is much like our Veterans Day or Memorial Day and how those things have changed over the years. We forget. We forget our history. We don't teach our children. We send them off to government schools to be indoctrinated and brainwashed to be good little citizens. We forget. So it talks about it being a 3-day weekend for most people, shoppers, mattress sales, blah, blah, blah. Do Americans get the holiday off? Federal workers in the United States get the holiday off. The labor movement today. The labor movement today is nonsense. It's give me free stuff. If you understood how corrupt and how horrible unions were, what people did within unions, how the mafia weaponized unions, how they had done so since very early on in the mafioso power, why many of our cities were completely destroyed by the mafia and unions and these Democrats, these leftist progressive types, emboldening them and embracing them, then you might not be so pro-union. I worked at FedEx briefly. UPS is unionized. UPS pays more money, but they also let you be a lot slower, a lot more lazier. And I've talked to managers that worked for both, and most of them like FedEx more. So, from the industrial workers of the world, a union for all workers. This is from 1993. I like that because I like old articles. Old articles are not generally as indoctrinated as the woke speak articles are today. So it says most people living in the United States know little about International Workers' Day of May Day. For many others, there is an assumption that it is a holiday celebrated in state communist countries like Cuba and the former Soviet Union. Most Americans don't realize that May Day has its origins here in the country and is as American as baseball and apple pie, and stemmed from the pre-Christian holiday of Beltane, a celebration and rebirth of fertility. That's right, Beltane is a pagan holiday. In any case, it's not necessarily that this was American at all. Most of these workers and strikers, in fact, were early immigrants to America from Eastern Europe. They were not of the same ideals of the early American immigrants, who were primarily English, Welsh, Scottish, some Irish, Dutch, and German. And as we open up our borders and we let more Eastern Europeans in and other nations, we let Italians in, we let whatever else in, there were arguments against these groups coming in, much like there are today, because of the radically changing culture and the potential for it to influence government. Remember, when JFK was elected president, he was the first president to be a Catholic. That was a big deal when he was elected president, because the Catholic Church had a long, storied history of controlling governments, because the Catholic Church itself is a political agency. It is not a religious agency. It is 100% a political agency. It is the woman that rides the beast in the book of Revelations. But that's another tangent for another video, another time. So it says at this time, socialism was new, an attractive idea to the working people, many of whom were drawn to its ideology of working class control over the population and distribution of all goods and services. Workers had seen firsthand that capitalism benefited only their bosses, except for they were getting richer as well. They didn't have to. One of the things that happened with the Industrial Revolution that took a little while to correct was the loss of craftsmanship. See, craftsmen went away, and not completely, but it went away. You had less people that had specialized skill, and then you had people going to working in factories. And factory jobs are always generally good jobs, but they're also tough jobs, and they're loud, and there's danger involved with them. Even today, with safety standards that we have, they're difficult jobs. But it was just very different. You used to be able to, say you were some sort of craftsman, like a carpenter. Maybe you built furniture or something like that. Well, you used to be able to kind of take your time and then charge whatever you would like for your skill. There were points, of course, where people went out to the gold rush. There were gold miners. There were trackers. There were hunters. There were all kinds of different jobs that you may pursue. But most of the jobs in the United States, up until the Industrial Revolution and right through the beginnings of it, until the progressive era set in, were hard labor jobs. So it says thousands of men and women and children were dying needlessly every year in the workplace. Notice they never give any numbers here. It's just some thousands, with life expectancy as low as their early 20s in some industries. Well, there are still many, many dangerous jobs, and 90% of those jobs are done by men. Fishing, for instance. And little hope but death of raising out of their destitution. Socialism offered another option. Actually, no, it didn't. What happened in the United States as well as England was that the industrialization and capitalism brought prices down for everybody, for practically everything, while raising their wages very quickly, bringing everyone out of abject poverty. Socialism does the exact opposite. In fact, if anything, what socialism does is it creates shortages. Now, we talked about this the other day when I talked about how fascism is socialism, how the Nazis were socialist. Go back and watch that video, if you will. So, again, most of this stuff it's propagandistic, but here it talks about Chicago, 1884, Federation of Organized Trade Unions, and you can read these things for yourself. But I'm, working men to arms, a proclamation printed just before May 1st, 1886. One publisher appealed to the working people with this plea. They said, "Black Lives Matter." No, that wasn't the scream. It says, "War to the palace, peace to the cottage, and death to the luxurious idleness. The wage system is the only cause of the world's misery. It is supported by the rich classes, and to destroy it, they must be either made to work or die. 1 pound of dynamite is better than a bushel of ballots." And you wonder why a bomb went off. "Make your demand for the 8 hours with your weapons in hand to meet the capitalist bloodhounds, police, and militia in proper manner." Not surprisingly, the entire city was prepared for mass bloodshed, reminiscent of the railroad strike a decade earlier when police and soldiers gunned down hundreds of striking workers. On May 1st, 1886, more than 3,000 workers and 13,000 businesses, 300,000 workers and 1,300 businesses across the United States walked off their jobs in the first May Day celebration in history. In Chicago, the epicenter for the 8-hour day agitators, 40,000 went out on strike with the anarchists, and they were anarchists, much like the commies are still claimed to be anarchists. Those commies in the streets called Antifa. They're just terrorist people. That is all they are. They deserve no better name than terrorists. I know. I spent my military time being counter-terrorist trained. I know what terrorists are when I see them. And the forefront of the public's eye, with their fiery speeches and revolutionary ideology of direct action, anarchist and anarchism became respected and embraced by the working people and despised by the capitalists. Now, remember, I read to you earlier that there was a backlash to this in unionism because of it. People don't like this stuff. This is exactly what's going on today. So it talks about the Pinkerton Agency, which were essentially the private police at the time. They were overly large. They were not competing agencies. And if there were, they would, kind of get involved and assassinate them or do notorious things. This is what the movie Young Guns is about, Billy the Kid and all that stuff. I'm not going to go further into this just for the sake of time because I have a few other things I just want to show you so you can look this up. Now, this is Britannica about May Day, but it's talking about the old medieval holiday, and it's, ancient agricultural rituals. Greeks and the Romans held such festivals, the maypole, all that stuff, fertility for the crops, yada, yada, yada. But then they have a separate article on May Day, the international observance for communists. The historical struggles for the workers in the union. Yeah. And then here you see the workers marching. You gotta understand, people, that life was rough. Life was rough until very recently. And now, I'm complaining about it. It's rough. I don't have riots in my area. But I'm more concerned about the backlash that this is going to cause, the racism that will be ramped up because of this. I'm more concerned about all the businesses that will be destroyed. I'm more concerned about the corporatism that is taking over more and more the grips of the United States, these giant conglomerates. These people that actually, to some degree dictate what our government does. I'm not anti-corporation in any way, shape, or form. I am anti-power. I'm anti-tyranny. And so when you get to a point, there becomes a lot of tyranny. You can essentially do more with your corporate entities, such as Google, manipulating, and Facebook and YouTube manipulating what you get to see to manipulate votes. And then they go, oh, Russia, they had 10,000 bots or 1,000 bots, 2,000, whatever it was. I don't know. I've covered this before. Oh, Russia did it. Well, meanwhile, China has a couple 100,000, and according to Dr. Weinstein, whatever, I believe it's Weinstein or Weinstein, who testified before Congress, who is a lefty, who voted for Hillary Clinton, by the way, that he sees that Facebook engagements and Google manipulation can manipulate several million votes and may swing an election. You think big tech doesn't understand this? They don't understand their own analytics? Because I guarantee you they do. So again, anyways, back to this article. It just talks about what happened, the Haymarket riot in Chicago 5 years later, Grover Cleveland, uneasy with the socialist origins of the Workers' Day, signed legislation, meaning that's why they didn't make it May Day in the United States, to hold it on today. That would be today see if I can get this a little bit bigger. That would be today, the day of Labor Day. Well, that's not going to work for me, guys. So this is literally a communist holiday. And I'm telling you, if Joe Biden gets into office, Kamala Harris, there will be a BLM holiday. There'll be a George Floyd or something holiday. They'll memorialize every horrible criminal because that they died in police custody, drug addict, low life, whatever. And then 100 years from now, if this movement of progressivism continues, you'll read, people, our children will read history books, our grandchildren, about how this was this great struggle in America and how horrible racism was in America at this time. And most of us know it was not. So this was from 2007, The History of Labor Day from Forbes. Most of us in the world mark Labor Day on May 1st, and parades most of the world marks Labor Day as May 1st. Parades and rallies and celebrations, blah, blah, blah. Engels, the co-author of the Communist Manifesto, had high hopes for May Day, which originated in the United States when the socialist-dominated organization known as the Second International jumped on the American bandwagon and adopted May 1st as an international Labor Day. Engels confidently expected the proletariats of Europe and America to merge into one mighty labor movement and sweep capitalism into the dustbin of history. By murdering like the majority of the population, by the way. Let's not forget that, or put those who do not agree in the camps, lying to people, making everybody ultimately poor, everything that happens historically when you implement these things. May Day's origins can be traced to Chicago, where a federation of organized traders and trade unions led under Samuel Gompers mounted a general strike on May 1st, 1886. It says, on May 4th, during a related Labor Day rally, the Haymarket Square, someone threw a bomb which killed a policeman and touched off a deadly melee. When I talked about Rittenhouse and his self-defense, the day before that I said that these things will escalate and they will get worse. And then immediately afterwards, that happened. And then immediately afterwards, a Patriot Prayer man was stalked and murdered by a progressive leftist. And then he was interviewed on Vice News and lied about the entire thing. We have the security footage. We know that he stalked him because these people don't care about the means. They don't care about how they get their way. They will rape, steal, murder, burn down, do whatever they want, rob you. They will do whatever they want because to them it is justified because of their anger. And they know in their hearts of hearts that they are right and bringing in their utopia. And what they know the least is that they will be the first to go. They will be the first to be executed because those that have true power will execute them. So this is from National Geographic. I just want to show you guys. There's all kinds of articles on this. So this was here from the 4th. And it says, Labor Day surprisingly radical origins, which of course are a matter of, it's a matter of today's perspective, which is violence and rioting and murdering in the streets, looting, all of that. Celebrated each year on the first Monday in September, this holiday was born amid violence and unrest over oppressive working conditions. Well, that's a good framing device, oppressive working conditions. But I can tell you, FedEx isn't fun, guys. FedEx is not fun. You could call that oppressive working conditions. They also wouldn't get anything done if they didn't operate the way that they did. For many, Labor Day weekend signals the end of summer and the opportunity to host a socially distanced barbecue. All right, well, this is garbage. I already read to you the origins. You can get more into it. I'm not reading an article that talks about social distancing at your barbecue. Come on. So here's the Department of Labor. Why it matters. The first Monday of September is created a Labor Day movement dedicated to the social and economic achievements of American workers. See how the government, they just straight up lie. They don't give you any real depth what happened. Labor Day legislation came in 1885 and 1886. From these, a movement developed to secure legislation. The first state bill was introduced into New York, and law was passed in Oregon on February 22nd, 1887. 4 more states adopted it. By 1894, 23 more states had adopted it, and then Congress finally made it one. Founder of Labor Day. Some records show Peter J. McGuire, General Secretary of the Brotherhood of Carpenters and Joiners, co-founder. I really just want to go through this because, see, it's International Associations of Machinists in Paterson, New Jersey. The first Labor Day, nationwide holiday, form of observance, strength, and esprit de corps to the trade and labor organizations. Notice how this, being the government website, talks nothing about insurrections, literal riots, bombings, murders. the government coming in with militias and the marshals and the military to stop them. Not a single ounce of it. And you want to send your kid to these schools too, to these government-run schools. And don't get me wrong, I've sent my daughter to public school, but I've educated her the entire way through it. So guys, lastly, Marie Claire. Yes, I will source anything. Can white be worn after Labor Day? The short answer is yes. And that was printed this year. So I just bring this up because you know how Black Bloc works, how they go out and they all wear black. Well, they should be wearing white. They should be going out and wearing white. No. I bring this up, though, to show how elitism has always been used and used by people. And essentially what it talks about, yes, we're referring to the age-old question, can I wear white after Labor Day? The short answer is yes. In fact, the story behind this arbitrary dress code is unconvincingly feeble. The history in the late 19th century, long before you could wear jeans to a Michelin star restaurant, the society ladies were engaged in an invisible battle with the nouveau riche, which they could only be won with subtle manipulation of fashion. The "you can't wear white after Labor Day" rule was created to separate the old money elitist from the new money group. That's because as this stuff went on and the progressive era came about, up until the Great Depression, America was becoming economically super powerhouse. We only remain that now today because we are the international currency and our money is tied to oil. However, if we remained on a gold standard, we would be even more powerful than we are today, but that power would be far more evenly distributed amongst the people. But the elitists, they don't like you to be part of their group. And you have to understand that this has always existed and that they are the ones that are part and parcel of the progressive movement. So it said it was insiders trying to keep other people out, according to Valerie Steele, director of the museum at Fashion Institute and Technology, in an interview in the Times. The outsiders trying to climb in by proving they knew the rules. So I wanted to highlight all of this today because tomorrow I believe we're going to talk about the elitist coup that Smedley Butler foiled. Now, if you aren't aware of this, it's often called the business coup, but it is essentially a communist overthrow or takeover of the United States government, the federal government, that was going to happen, that Smedley Butler blew wide open, and people now say was just conspiracy theory. Yet there were congressional hearings on this, and it was swept under the rug. I wonder why that is. Well, I can tell you why. Because many of those same people were in the government already. Because the progressive movement has started from this era, from that 1880s period, since the Reconstruction. See, if you understand American history properly, you will see that the biggest power grab initially in American history was that Civil War we had. It was that divide between the North and the South. And you can say all you want how evil slavery was. I would agree with you. But the North had no right to aggress on the South either. And Lincoln didn't care about the slaves, people. That's just a myth. He really didn't care. He just wanted to keep the Union together. When he wrote the Declaration Proclamation, he didn't free anybody. He said the slaves in the South were freed. Well, the South had seceded. They were their own country as far as they were concerned. But that, again, is another lesson of real history and not the fake progressive garbage shoved down our throats today. So with all that said, I hope you enjoyed this. Please hit that like button, share, subscribe. Help me grow, folks. This has been AllMinucOne. My name is Bill. I hope you all are well.